The dining hall at Wycombe Hall held 40 people, and not one of them expected the new companion to speak. She stood at the foot of the long table where the poor relations and the paid women were placed, her grey gown plain against the gold of the room, her hands folded over the back of a chair she had not yet been permitted to take. The Duke of Aldermore sat at the head of it, 60 feet of polished mahogany and candle silver between them, and when his aunt named the cousin he was meant to marry. The whole table turned to look at the girl in primrose silk who blushed on cue. No one turned to look at the woman in grey. She had counted on that. She had been counting on it for 3 weeks, since the morning the post-chaise had set her down at the gates with a single trunk and a letter of character signed by a dead woman. The room had decided what she was within an hour of her arrival: a companion to the dowager, a woman past her best years, plain, biddable, grateful. She let them keep the picture. It cost her nothing, and it would be worth a great deal before the season turned. Her name was Frances Aldous, though only the housekeeper used it, and she was 26 years old. She had not always been a companion. There had been a house in Hampshire once, and a father who taught her to read a ledger before she could properly hold a pen, and a brother who had laughed at her for it. The house was gone now, and the father and the brother had gone to the war and not come back, and the ledger she had learned to read had told her, in the end, exactly how a family of standing could be hollowed from the inside by a man trusted to manage what he was stealing. Frances knew the shape of that theft, the way other women knew the shape of a country dance. She had watched it done to her own. She had sworn she would never again sit across a table from such a man, and fail to recognize him. And then 3 weeks ago she had walked into the dining hall at Wycombe Hall, and recognized one at once. His name was Mr. Silas Renshaw, and he was the Duke of Aldermore's man of business. He sat that first evening at the dowager's right hand, 3 places above Frances, and he had the smooth, untroubled face of a man who has never been doubted by anyone whose doubt could reach him. He spoke of the estate's accounts with the ease of long ownership. He spoke of the Duke's affairs as though they were his own. And once, when the dowager asked some small question about the rents from the western farms, Frances saw him answer with a number that was very nearly the truth, and watched the almost in it pass across 40 faces without catching on a single one. She lowered her eyes to her plate. She said nothing. But the old reading had begun in her without her permission, the columns assembling themselves in her mind, and she understood that she had not come to Wycombe Hall to be a companion at all. She had come to wait. If you have ever been looked at once and filed away forever, you know the particular freedom of it. Stay with me, and watch what a patient woman does with 3 weeks no one is counting. The Duke himself was the difficulty. Frances had expected to dislike him, because she had disliked, on principle, every man who had ever held more than he had earned, and a duke held more than any man alive. But Julian Carew, the Duke of Aldermore, did not behave as she had been taught dukes behaved. He was perhaps 34, tall and severe. With dark hair he wore unfashionably plain, and a jaw that seemed always set against some private weather. He did not laugh. He did not flatter the women his aunt arranged before him like cut flowers. He moved through his own house as though it belonged to a man he was holding it in trust for, and the staff watched him with a wariness that Frances, who had served in 3 houses now, knew at once was not fear of cruelty, but fear of disappointing a grief they could not name. Something had happened in this house. The portrait gallery had a gap in it, a paler rectangle on the wall where a painting had hung and hung no longer, and no one spoke of it, and the Duke walked past that gap each morning without turning his head, which is the surest way a man has of looking at a thing. The Dowager Duchess had decided Frances was beneath notice, which suited Frances exactly. Lady Honoria Carew was a woman of 70, whose every motion was a small act of governance, the fan held at a measured height, the glance dispatched and withdrawn, the cool greeting that warmed or cooled by half a degree, according to a calculation no one else could see her make. She had buried a husband and a daughter-in-law, and meant to bury nothing else of value. And she had concluded that her nephew, the Duke, must marry her great-niece Cordelia before the autumn, and that the marriage would restore to the family a fortune the family had somehow misplaced. Where the fortune had gone, the Dowager did not ask. She trusted Mr. Renshaw to know. She had trusted Mr. Renshaw for 11 years. "The companion may pour," the Dowager said that first week, not looking at Frances when the tea came in and a footman was wanting. It was the first instruction Frances had received directly, and she received it as she received all of them, with a small inclination of the head, and no expression at all. She poured. She handed the cup to Cordelia, who took it without seeing the hand that offered it, and to Mr. Renshaw, who saw the hand and dismissed it, and to the Duke, who looked up. It was nothing. It was a half-second, less. But the Duke of Aldermore looked up from his correspondence as the cup was set beside him, and his eyes found Frances's face, and for the length of one breath, he did not look away as a man looks away from furniture. He looked the way a man looks when a sound he half remembers reaches him across a crowded room. Then he inclined his head, a courtesy no one offered the companion, and returned to his letters. Frances stepped back to her place. Her pulse had quickened, which annoyed her, because she had not given it permission, and she pressed her palm flat against the cool wood of the sideboard until it slowed. She told herself it was only that she was unused to being seen. She told herself a great many things in those first weeks that were not entirely true. The work she had come to do required patience, and a quality of attention that looked, to anyone watching, like idleness. A companion has time. She sits in corners while her mistress sleeps. She is sent to fetch and carry through rooms. Grander persons have forgotten she may enter. And so, over the long, mild evenings of that first fortnight, Frances learned the house. She learned that the steward's room where Mr. Renshaw kept the estate books was locked at night, and the key kept on the man's own person, which told her something. She learned that the Duke rose before the servants and walked the grounds alone, which told her something else. She learned that there had been a duchess, Julian's wife, a gentle creature named Helena who had died of a fever 3 winters past, and that the gap in the gallery was where her portrait had hung until the Duke had ordered it taken down within a week of the funeral, and that no one knew why a man would hide the face of a wife he was said to have loved. The servants thought a grief too sharp to look at. Frances, who trusted the simplest explanation least, thought it might be something else, and filed the thought away with the others. She made her first careful error on a Tuesday, and it was not an error at all, but a thing she did on purpose to see what would happen. The Dowager had set her to copying out the household accounts into a fair hand, a task beneath a clerk and therefore exactly suited to a companion, and among the figures Frances copied was a sum paid quarterly to a corn factor in Bristol for grain. The Western farms did not need, and Frances was nearly certain had never received. She copied the figure faithfully. Then, when she returned the fair copy to the Dowager's writing table, she left beside it a small slip on which she had noted, in a hand made deliberately uncertain, that the Bristol sum seemed to have been entered twice in the spring quarter, and she hoped she had not misread. It was the kind of thing a careful, anxious, not very clever woman might notice and fret over. It was bait, and she set it where Mr. Renshaw would find it, because Mr. Pesht. Renshaw read everything that crossed the Dowager's table, and she wanted to watch him decide what she was. He decided she was nothing. That was the answer she had wanted, and the answer that told her most. The slip vanished. The next morning, Mr. Burt. Renshaw was particularly kind to her at breakfast. In the loud, careless way a man is kind to a dog that has done a small trick, and he said, where the table could hear, that it was a mercy the Dowager had found so diligent a companion, though figures were trying for a lady, and Miss Aldous must not strain herself over sums that were, after all, the business of men. The table smiled. Cordelia tittered. The Dowager allowed that diligence was a virtue, even where understanding was wanting. And Frances, who had once kept the books of an estate twice the size of Wycombe before she was 20, lowered her eyes and murmured that she was sure Mr. Safety. Renshaw knew best, and felt the trap she was building settle one beam more firmly into place. The Duke, at the head of the table, said nothing, but he set down his knife when Renshaw spoke, and he did not pick it up again until the subject had passed, and Frances marked that too. It was the child who undid her caution first. The Duke had a ward, a boy of 7 named Tobias, the son of a cousin killed at sea, and the boy lived in the nursery wing with a nurse, who drank, and a governess, who had given notice, and no one, in the great rooms below, thought of him from one week to the next. Frances found him by accident on a wet afternoon, sitting alone on the back stairs because the nursery had no fire laid, and the boy had learned not to ask, he was too thin. He had a book open on his knees that he could not read, and he was turning the pages anyway, slowly, with the gravity of a child performing a thing he has seen adults do, and does not understand. Frances sat down on the stair beside him without a word. She did not pity him aloud, because she had learned what aloud pity does to a proud child, having been one. She simply opened the book to the first page and began to read it to him, low and even the way her own father had read to her. And the boy leaned against her arm by the 3rd page, as though he had been waiting years for an arm to lean on, which perhaps he had. She read to Tobias every wet afternoon after that, and several dry ones. In the cold nursery, she persuaded a sympathetic maid to lay a fire in, and she told no one, because it was no one's business, and because a companion who oversteps is a companion dismissed. She did not know she had been seen. The Duke of Aldermore walked his grounds at dawn, but he walked his house at odd hours too. Restless in the rooms his wife had died in, and one gray afternoon he stopped outside the nursery door because he heard a woman's voice reading the passage about the patient donkey who carried more than anyone thought he could. And he stood in the corridor and listened to the end of it, and he did not go in. Frances learned this only much later. At the time, she knew only that the boy began to be better fed, that a new governess arrived within the fortnight, and that the nursery fire was laid each morning now, without her having to beg for it. And she did not connect these mercies to anything, because she had taught herself long ago not to expect that being good would be noticed by anyone with the power to reward it. The Duke began to find reasons. This is the way of a certain kind of man, that he cannot simply approach a thing he wants, but must build a road of pretexts to it and pretend the road was there before. He required of a sudden that the companion attend the dowager in the library of an evening, where the light was better for the old woman's eyes, which meant Frances sat in the library 3 nights of the week with a work-basket, while the dowager dozed and the Duke read in the wing chair by the fire as though no one else were in the room. They did not speak for the first week of this, but the silence between them changed its quality, the way the air changes before weather, and Frances found that she was always aware of exactly where he was, that she could have pointed to him with her eyes shut, that the back of her neck knew when he set down his book before her ears did. She did not like it. She had a thing to do at Wycombe Hall, and the thing did not include the way her breath caught when his low voice asked, the second week, with no preamble at all, what she was reading. "Cowper, your Grace," she said. "The letters. You read his verse to my ward." It was not a question. She went still. "The maid told you," she said, which was a thing she should not have said, because it admitted she had wished it kept secret. And the Duke heard the admission and turned it over, and set it down gently. "No one told me," he said. "I heard you. You read it well. He is fed now, and warm. I had not known he was neither. He looked at the fire, not at her, and his jaw did its private work against the weather no one else could see. I do not always know what happens in my own house. That is a failing in a man. I am told it is a common one." And Frances, who had come to this house with a settled contempt for men who held more than they earned, felt the contempt shift under her like a floor she had thought was stone, and found was only ice over a river. And she was angry at the shifting, and she did not yet understand the anger. And she said only, "He is a good boy, your Grace." He had wanted very little, only to be remembered. The Duke was quiet a long moment. "Yes," he said, "I know something of that wish." Then the dowager woke, and the moment closed like a fan, and Frances bent over her work-basket and did not look up, and her hands were not quite steady on the thread. Here is the thing she had not planned for, and a patient woman hates nothing so much as a thing she did not plan for. She had built her contempt for years and used it as armor, and the armor only fit a certain shape of man, and the Duke of Aldermore was not that shape. The man she had come to ruin was Renshaw. The Duke was only the roof Renshaw sheltered under, and she had assumed with the easy certainty of the wounded that the roof was complicit in the rot. But a complicit man does not lie awake over a ward he has neglected. A complicit man does not take down his wife's portrait and walk past the gap each morning with his head deliberately straight. There was a wound in this house that was not the wound she had come to dress, and against all her intention, she had begun to want to understand it, and wanting to understand a man is the first step on a road that does not lead back to where you began. The Dowager escalated because the Dowager could feel the autumn coming, and the marriage not made. She had decided Cordelia must be brought forward, and so a great dinner was announced. 30 covers, the neighborhood invited, the occasion ostensibly a celebration of the harvest, and actually a stage on which the Duke might be made to propose by the sheer social weight of everyone expecting it. In the days before the dinner, the Dowager's attention sharpened on Frances in the way attention sharpens on a tool that has begun to be in the way. "You will keep to the side passages on the night," she told her fan at its measured height. "Cordelia's people are particular, and a companion underfoot will not do. You understand me. You are not the sort of woman one displays." It was said pleasantly. In the morning room with Cordelia present, and idly examining her own reflection in the window glass, Cordelia smiled at the reflection. "Oh, but she is useful, Aunt," the girl said, not unkindly, which was worse than unkindly. "Every house should have a useful sort of woman. One simply does not seat them." And Frances inclined her head, and said she understood perfectly, and she did. She understood that the dinner would gather every person of consequence in the county into one candlelit room, that Mr. Renshaw would be among them, easy and untroubled at the Dowager's right hand, and that a stage built for one purpose may be used for another by anyone patient enough to wait in its side passages. She had what she needed by then. It had taken 3 weeks and a great deal of idleness that was not idleness. The slow assembling of columns, a letter written to a Bristol corn factor in a hand not her own asking innocent questions, a reply that named no grain ever sent because none ever had been. A quiet hour in the steward's room. On the one afternoon Renshaw rode to the county town and forgot for once that the key he carried opened a lock. A hairpin opened just as well. She had the second ledger, then true one, the one Renshaw kept behind the false, and in it she had read 11 years of a great house, bled patiently, white sums diverted, rents pocketed, a fortune that the Dowager believed a marriage might restore long since carried out the door in a man's coat. She had the names, and she had the dates, and she had copied in her own clear hand. The figures that did not match the figures Renshaw showed the family. She had everything except a moment, and the Dowager, by gathering the county into one room, had just handed her the moment. She did not gloat over it. That is not in her. She sat that night at the window of her small, cold room, and looked at the paper she had made, and felt no triumph, only the old grief sharpening to a point, because she was about to do for this stranger's house what no one had been quick enough to do for her own, and the doing would not bring back the house in Hampshire, or the father or the brother who had laughed at her ledgers and died in Spain. It would only stop the bleeding here. That would have to be enough. It had to be enough because it was all there was. She folded the papers small and sewed them into the lining of her plain gray sleeve, where no one searches a woman no one sees. I will tell you now what she did not know, because she would not have believed it. While she sat sewing proof into her sleeve, the Duke of Aldermore sat in his study with a letter from a Bristol corn factor that had come to him by a different road, and a suspicion 11 years old that had never had a shape until a woman in gray left an anxious slip about a doubled sum on his aunt's writing table, where he, too, read everything that crossed it. He had married Helena to please his family and had failed her in 100 small ways. A young husband fails a wife, and when she died, he had taken down her portrait, not from grief, but from shame, because in the last year of her life, She had tried to tell him something was wrong with the accounts, with Renshaw. And he had been too proud and too busy and too certain a duke could not be robbed in his own house to listen to a frightened woman, and she had died with the wrong of it unmended between them. That was the wound. That was the gap in the gallery. He had let a quiet woman go unheard once, and it had cost a life its peace, and he had sworn over the paler rectangle on the wall that he would not do it again. And then a companion had murmured about a doubled sum, and he had looked up. The night of the dinner came on, cold and clear, the first hard frost of the autumn silvering the lawns. Wycombe Hall blazed. 30 covers down the long table, the candelabra lit. The orchestra Lady Honoria had brought from town, tuning in the gallery above, the neighborhood arriving in carriages and shedding furs in the hall. Cordelia in white and diamonds at the dowager's hand, Mr. Four-Eye, Renshaw beside her, smooth as ever, a glass of the Duke's claret warming in his palm, and Frances in the side passages in her grey gown, useful and unseated, carrying the dowager's shawl and the dowager's vinaigrette, and the proof of 11 years of theft sewn into her sleeve. She watched the room fill through the gap of a half-open door. She found the Duke at the head of it, and even now, even tonight, the back of her neck knew where he was before her eyes, confirmed it, and she let herself look at him one moment longer than was wise. The severe, plain man who had laid a fire for a forgotten child and called his own failing common, and she thought, with the clear, cold grief of a woman who has decided something, that she had not come here to be moved, and that it was very inconvenient to have been moved, and that none of it changed what she had to do. The dowager rose to make the announcement near the end of the second course, as Frances had known she would, because the dowager could not wait any longer, and a public expectation is the strongest lever a hostess owns. She tapped her glass. The room hushed. She spoke of family and of fortune and of the great satisfaction it gave her to see 2 houses joined, and she turned toward the Duke with the smile of a woman laying down a winning card. And it was into that hush, before the Duke could rise, before the toast could be made, that Mr. Renshaw set down his glass and said, smoothly, fatally, that the family's fortune had never been in better order, and the Union would want for nothing, the Western farms alone yielding more this year than in any year of his stewardship. He said it to reassure 30 witnesses. He said it because he had said such things for 11 years, and they had always been believed. He could not have known that the one woman in the room no one had seated had a Bristol corn factor's reply sewn into her sleeve, or that she had been waiting 3 weeks for a man that confident to say a thing that exact in front of that many ears. Frances stepped out of the side passage and into the candlelight. She did not hurry. She crossed to the foot of the table, to her place, the unseated place, and the room registered her slowly, a gray shape where no gray shape belonged. The companion surely lost, surely about to be sent out. The dowager's fan stopped at its measured height, and Frances, in a voice pitched to carry the length of 60 feet of mahogany, a clear, steady voice that had once read ledgers aloud to a father who taught her not to fear a column of figures, said, "Forgive me, Mr. Renshaw is mistaken about the Western farms. I have the accounts." For one breath nothing in the room moved. Then she drew the papers from her sleeve. She did not raise her voice. She read the corn factor's reply first. The plain words of a Bristol merchant stating he had sent no grain to Wycombe in 11 years and been paid for none, and then she read the 2 columns, side by side, the figures, Mr. Prawn. Renshaw showed the family and the figures. Mr. Renshaw kept behind them, quarter by quarter, year by year, the patient hemorrhage of a great house laid out in a companion's clear copying hand. She named the corn factor that did not exist, and the rents that had never come in, and the sums that had gone out in a man's coat, and she did it without heat, the way a physician names a wound, because heat would have let them call her hysterical, and she had not waited 3 weeks to be called hysterical. Renshaw came to his feet. His smooth face had gone the color of tallow. He said the woman was mad, was dismissed, was a companion who had got above herself, was not to be heard. He said it too many times, and a man who says a thing too many times in a silent room is heard saying it. And the county heard him, and the county began, slowly, to look from the smooth man saying mad too often to the gray woman who had not raised her voice once. The dowager turned to her nephew. It was the only direction left to turn. 11 years of trust were collapsing under her in real time, and she reached by instinct for the authority that had always settled every room, and she said, her voice not quite as level as she meant it, "Julian, send her out. This is not to be borne." The Duke of Aldermore stood. He had risen at some point, and Francis had not seen him do it, and now he stood at the head of his own table with the candlelight on his severe plain face, and he was not looking at his aunt, and he was not looking at Renshaw. He was looking down the full 60 feet of mahogany at the woman in gray. And the look was not the look a man gives a problem to be removed. It was the look of a man who has heard, at last and in time, the thing he failed once to hear. And the thing was not too late this time, and the relief of that broke across his face for everyone to see, and a duke's face is not supposed to break in front of 30 people, and his did. He crossed the room. He did not go around the table. He came down its length, past Cordelia, past his aunt, past the tallow-faced man still saying mad to no one now, and he stopped before Frances, who stood her ground because she had not survived 3 weeks to flinch in the last yard, and he held out his hand for the papers. She gave them to him. He read the top sheet. He read enough. Then he raised his head and spoke, not loudly, but a duke does not need to be loud, and what he said to the whole county, and to his aunt, and to the white-faced girl in diamonds, and to the man whose 11 years had just ended, but mostly he said it to her. Miss Alice has my full confidence in my hand. The room did not breathe. 8 words. A name claimed, a confidence declared, and the second of those things changing. The first from a scandal into a betrothal in the space of 1 sentence, so that the county which had come to watch a duke marry a girl in diamonds found itself watching a duke claim a companion in gray and could not in decency do anything but receive it. The dowager's hand came down upon the table. Cordelia's reflection in the dark window glass had stopped, admiring itself. And Renshaw, understanding at last that the road out of the room ran through magistrates now and not through any door he could reach, sat down very slowly, because his legs had stopped holding him. What followed took weeks, and was not dramatic, which is how real things end. The Duke's solicitor came down from London with 2 clerks and went through the steward's room beam by beam. The magistrate was sent for. Renshaw, who had protected his false books for 11 years, and never once imagined that the unprotected danger sat at the foot of the table pouring tea, was taken into the law's keeping to answer for what the true books said, and the fortune that the dowager had believed a marriage might restore turned out, in part, recoverable. Einhale lands he had bought with it in his own name, and could now be made to disgorge. The dowager did not apologize because women of 70 who have governed every room for 50 years do not apologize, but she sent for Frances one gray morning and looked at her a long time and said, at last, that she had mistaken her, and that she did not mistake the same thing twice, and that the family was in her debt, which, from Lady Honoria Carrow, was a more complete surrender than tears. Cordelia went back to town and married a baronet within the year, and was, by all accounts, content, having wanted the diamonds more than the man, and there was no cruelty in any of it, only the quiet correction of people who had been confidently wrong. The Duke came to Frances in the library, where so much of it had begun. On an evening when the first snow of the new winter was sifting down past the tall, dark windows, she was at the writing table. She had been the mistress of Wycombe Hall and Law for a fortnight, and in practice for longer, and she still rose before she remembered she need not, and her hand still reached for a companion's work-basket, before she remembered the basket was someone else's now. He stood across the table from her, and he did not this once build a road of pretext to the thing he wanted. He said her name, Frances. Only that, the given name in his low voice, the first time he had used it, and it landed in the snow-quiet room like a thing set down at last after long carrying. You knew what he was before any of us, he said. Within an hour, I think. You told me once the boy had wanted only to be remembered. I've wondered since whether you were speaking only of the boy. She might have deflected it. She had deflected everything for 3 weeks and most of a lifetime before that. But there is a point past, which a woman who has been brave about everything else may as well be brave about this. And she found she had reached it. And she set down her pen. I came here to ruin a thief, she said. I did not come here to be seen by you. I had arranged my whole life so as not to be seen by anyone. It was safer. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. And then you laid a fire for a child you had forgotten, and you called your own failing common. You ruined the arrangement entirely, and I've been very angry with you for it. The corner of the Duke's severe mouth moved. The nearest thing to amusement his grief had let through in 3 years. And the sight of it undid the last of her armor more thoroughly than any speech could have. I am sorry, he said, not sounding sorry at all. I find I am not sorry. He came around the table then. He did not seize her hands or sink to a knee, or perform any of the things the season trains a man to perform. He stopped close, closer than the dance permits, and he reached up. And with one finger tucked back a strand of hair that had come loose at her temple over the long day's work, and his hand stilled there a moment at her jaw. Not holding, only resting, asking a question the body answers before the mouth is consulted. Who had known where he was in every room for weeks without looking? Did not have to look now. Her breath went uneven. She let it. She had spent 26 years managing everything, and she chose, in that one moment, by the snow-lit window, to manage nothing. I should tell you, she said low, that I am not a biddable woman. The dowager was wrong about that. I will read your ledgers, your grace, every one of them. I will tell you when the figures lie, and I will not lower my eyes at your table. I know it, he said. I am counting on it. I have had enough of houses where the quiet women are not heard. His thumb moved once, the smallest motion, along the line of her jaw. Helena tried to tell me, at the end, about the money, about him. I did not listen. I took her down from the wall because I could not bear to be looked at by someone I had failed. He drew a breath. I have hung her again in the gallery, where she was. It seemed a coward's thing to keep hiding what I had done. And Frances understood then the whole shape of him. The gap in the gallery filled. The wound, named once, and not to be named again, and she lifted her own hand and laid it over his at her jaw. And that was the kiss before the kiss, the agreement of 2 hands. And, when the actual kiss came, a moment later, it was soft and full of a promise that neither of them said aloud, because they did not after everything need to. They were married quietly in the village church before the snow had fully melted, with Tobias holding the ring on a cushion and taking the office with enormous seriousness, and the dowager in the front pew governing the proceedings with her fan, at its measured height, as though she had arranged the whole match herself. 20, which by the spring she had persuaded herself she had. There was no county crowded in to watch this time. That had been the other room, the room of verdicts. This was the room of the thing that came after verdicts, and it wanted only the few people to whom it was true. By the following winter there was a fire in the nursery every morning as a matter of course, and a boy who read aloud now in a clear, unhurried voice he had got from somewhere, and a duke who came in from the grounds at an hour the servants could predict. His restlessness gone out of the house with the man who had caused it. And on the evening of the first hard frost, a year to the night from the dinner, Frances stood at the tall library window, with the snow coming down past the dark glass, and a ledger open on the table behind her. The true accounts kept now in her clear hand because the keeping of them had become of all things hers. The donkey book was on the shelf where Tobias could reach it. The portrait hung again in the gallery, a gentle face that had tried once to be heard, and was now in the only way left, the wrong of it mended in a house that had learned to listen. Her husband came and stood beside her at the window, not touching, only near, the way they had learned to stand near in the long library evenings, before either would admit to it. And they watched the snow fill the silvered lawns where she had once watched the carriages arrive. She had been the woman, No one. Seated. She had let them think her plain and biddable and past her best years, and she had been, the whole time, exactly the person the house most needed and least expected, waiting at the foot of the table for a confident man to say a thing too exact, waiting in the side passages for a stage built for someone else, waiting, though she had not known it was what she waited for a severe grieving man to look up from his letters and not look away. The Duke had believed she was weak. So had they all. And she stood now in the warm, snow-lit room that had become her home, in no gray gown, with her hand finding her husband's in the dark, without either of them needing to look, and she found that the old grief had at last set down its point, and that being seen, when it came from the one whose seeing reordered everything, was not the danger she had spent her life arranging against. It was only in the end the thing she had been waiting for,